writing thing, we always talk about doors opening up. Some close, some open up. This was a door that opened up. I went through it, and then another door opened up and I went through that one. And then finally the one with the Canadian government opened up and I went through that one. If I was a Hollywood actor, you would say, oh, you were able to reinvent yourself so many times, being a horror writer and then a mystery writer and then writing about truck driving. Yeah, well, through the whole thing, I was a professional writer. Professional can, write to specifications, deliver on time what somebody wants. And, that's a talent in itself. And when you can do that, people like to work with you.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 288 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Edo van Belkom. Edo van Belkom is a former reporter on the sports and police beats and is the author of multiple novels, more than 150 short stories as well that have garnered him the Bram Stoker Award and the Aurora Award. Edo's 2004 young adult novel Wolfpack won Ontario's prestigious Silver Birch Award, and in January of 2023, exactly January 26, 2023, the day I'm recording this, that very same award-winning novel, and 3 other books in the same series written by Edo, have been adapted into an American supernatural teen drama on Paramount Plus, starring none other than Sarah Michelle Gellar, and produced by Jeff Davis, known for creating the drama series Criminal Minds and the TV series Teen Wolf. Now, Edo and I talk about that as well as the amazing journey he has had through writing and publishing. And that's coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is a platform that allows authors to take control of their audiobook destiny. If you have the rights to your audiobook, if you've not sold them to a publisher, you can leverage Findaway Voices for doing things like finding a narrator. There is a driven one with a project manager that you can use using one of the experts at Findaway Voices, or there's a DIY option using Voices Marketplace. When you set your book for distribution through Findaway Voices, you can choose from more than 43 retail and library platforms, or you can go all in. They have special tools, special promotions, special features. I, right now, on January 26th, have a Chirp deal for my bundle, my 2-book bundle called Bundle of Fears and Frights. It contains the novels Fear and Longing in Los Angeles and Fright Night's Big City. So that 2-book audio deal, more than 17 hours of audio for $1.99 at Chirp Books, and Chirp is run by BookBub. And the only way an indie author can get their audiobooks into Chirp is through Findaway Voices. If you have the files for your audiobook, for example, you've worked directly with your professional narrators, like I have done in the case of my Canadian werewolf novels, all on sale at Chirp Books, you can just use Findaway Voices for uploading. The great thing about Findaway is you're always in control, you always have choice, and that choice and that control includes the price on all platforms except that one where you can't actually control your price and you can't control how many times they do returns and all the craziness and insanity that exists on that platform that shall not be named. But if you do want to check out how you can leverage Findaway Voices as an author, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. And now time for some comments. Over on Twitter, Edwin Downward said, in this week's Stark Reflections, Mark speaks to his guest about being vulnerable in the performance of our craft. In a world where there is so much noise, we all need to step out there in search of ways to get ourselves seen by the right people. Thanks for that comment, Edwin. I can't agree with you enough. It's really important, especially in this digital age and the advent of the ability for authors to adapt AI and AI processes and all of those things that kind of seem to remove our humanity. That uniqueness, that vulnerability, that doubling down on our humanity, as Joanna Penn likes to say, is something that's really, really important. I'm glad that you reflected on that over on the Twitter sphere. Also on the Twitter sphere, the indie author, aka Maddie Dalrymple, says, "Who do I support on Patreon? The ever-generous Mark Leslie Lefebvre, frequent visitor to at the Indie Author podcast." And yeah, I was recently interviewed by Maddie. I'll have a link to that in a future episode. We talked about The Canadian Mounted book, my tribute guide to the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Anyways, Maddie goes on to say, just a little aside here. And Maddie goes on to say, whose Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast is always an inspiration. Thank you so much, Maddie, and thank you for all the great work you do helping to inspire, entertain, and inform authors as well. And the last comment comes from Linda Hill via Patreon. And Linda says, "Thanks so much for the planner, Mark. I love it." Now, she's talking about the Josie planner from Joanne Carson and J.C. McKenzie. I'll have a link, of course, to that episode where I interviewed them about this awesome author planner for 2023. And this is part of patrons getting a chance to win some free copies, because I wanted to kind of, send some love out into the atmosphere there. Linda said, "Sorry it's taken so long to write. I have a new release on January 31st. It's been keeping me busy, but the Josie Planner has helped immensely." Oh my God, that's so awesome. Congratulations. Your release is just in a few days from the day I'm recording this, so break all the legs, Linda. Hope everything goes well. Linda goes on to say, "I'm writing also because I just realized my Patreon payment didn't go through on January 1st. I have no idea why, nor can I figure out why I'm still able to see you here, but I don't want my subscription to lapse. Any ideas?" Well, and this is embarrassing, but what I wanted to do for my longtime patrons is, I think it was mid-December, I turned off charging my patrons on January 1st. I just wanted to, kind of give you a bit of a break and go, hey, thanks for the support. I'm just going to turn it off so I don't charge you January 1st. You're still patrons. I thought the system was going to send a note to say that you're not being charged, but you're still a subscriber. And that's my bad. I should have realized that. I should have sent out a message to all my patrons to say, hey, just to let you know, you're not going to get charged on January 1st. So thanks for pointing that out, Linda. I didn't want, I'm sorry if that's confused or panicked anyone who thought that their subscription as a patron lapsed. But thank you. But no, I was just trying to sort of pay it forward a little bit and give you another surprise. And that's what I like to do, is I love to surprise my patrons. So speaking of patrons, I'd like to welcome new patron, Dharma Kelleher. Dharma, welcome to the small but powerful team of people who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections, where for $1, $3, or $5 a month, you can provide financial support to the podcast, because my sponsor helps pay for the hosting of the episodes, but my patrons pay for my time in producing this weekly podcast. And for your donation, for your support on Patreon, I provide extra content. I will provide extra episodes, extra reflections on other podcasts. Tend to be short episodes, 5 to 15 minutes, just little tidbits and things that I think will be valuable for you, as well as access to some additional options and features and visuals and things like that. Again, just my way of saying thank you back to the patron community for supporting me. Of course, if you want to join the patrons, you can always check it out over at patreon.com/starkreflections. But just a reminder that if you're enjoying the podcast, you do not have to become a patron. Leave a review on the podcatcher of your choice. Share this podcast with someone that you think would find value in it. Reach out to me and just let me know you're enjoying it, because to be quite honest, that means a lot when I've heard from people, when I've seen people at conferences and they mention that they enjoy listening to the podcast, it's kind of payment. It's payment by heart, if you know what I mean. Because as authors, we work in isolation, right? We're behind the keyboard, and very rarely do people actually reach out or leave reviews or say anything about what we're doing. And so it feels like we're operating in a vacuum. So a special thank you as well to all of those people who have over the years messaged me, emailed me, tagged me, or even just said in person when I've seen them how much they appreciate the podcast. Because to be quite honest, like, that is just, as you know, as an author, that is such a heartwarming thing to hear. And we authors rarely get that sort of praise very often. So again, a huge thank you, dear listener, for listening to the podcast. But that is enough of the preamble. Just before, I'm going to kind of skip the personal update, except to let you know that Julie Strauss and I are still gung-ho in the very, very, very final, few thousand words of Hex in the City, which is coming out in March, because we have to get that to our editor in early February so we can get that back and get the rewrites and everything ready to go, which is probably going to delay, obviously, the audiobook, because we're not going to be able to get the manuscript too far in advance to Sarah and Scott, but that'll come out later on. But that is going well. Julie and I have so many cool ideas, including where I'm going to go, where she's going to go, and a potential spin-off from that series. And then I've got some other smaller projects to kind of keep me busy. But in the meantime, before we get to the interview with Edo, I have to pre-reflect. There's going to be a reflection after the interview about something that he talks about, but a pre-reflection is Edo was one of the authors who was a mentor to me when I was, first growing up in the industry. I moved from Ottawa, Ontario to Hamilton, Ontario, and Edo is from the Toronto area, and I got to know him and some other writers, because there seemed to be a lot more writers. Well, it was kind of a weird thing. There were tons of writers in Ottawa, but because there was no online thing then yet, it was just beginning. The Ottawa Carleton Freenet was there. The internet was still the information superhighway, so it was early days. It wasn't really until finally I moved to Hamilton, that the connecting online, etc., and going to a whole bunch of events in the Toronto area led to meeting folks like Edo. But when I was, a more beginning writer, and I'd only had maybe a dozen or so short stories published by that time, Edo was a mentor to me. And his short story collection I mentioned in the interview, Death Drives a Semi, is still one of my favorite short story collections of all time. He is an absolute genius writer. I've had the honor of getting to publish his short fiction. I edited his fiction in Campus Chills, which was a wonderful experience. He wrote me a beautiful horror story for that. Beautiful horror story. He wrote me a chilling horror story, which I thought was pretty beautiful. But for my very first book, the self-published collection of short stories, One Hand Screaming, which is mostly just stories I'd had previously published in other magazines, which came out in 2004, Ada was kind enough to write a blurb, a testimonial blurb that I could use on the back of the book. And I'm just going to read that to you here very briefly. Mark Leslie is a writer with a bright, bright future. He can move from urban fantasy to magic realism, from hard science fiction to dark psychological horror with apparent ease. His stories are well written, skillfully told, and satisfyingly good to the last word. Edo van Belkom, author of Scream Queen. So that must have been around the time that Scream Queen was published in mass market paperback. Again, his novels are amazing as well. As a matter of fact, one of his novels, which was set in Montreal, it reminded me, it had such similarities to the feeling I had reading The Apprenticeship of Duty Kravitz by Mordecai Richler, one of Canada's great writers. And no, I mean, Edo's novel was a horror novel, and Mordecai Richler's was a literary novel. But the essence, the feeling of neighborhood, of community that I got from the Mordecai Richler book was also in Edo's book. He is a master storyteller. He's a great guy, and I'm so excited for the recent wonderful things that are happening in his life. And so This is a conversation, and again, it's been years since Edo and I've actually had a chance to catch up. So this is just a great excuse for us to catch up and chat for more than just a couple minutes. But I'm so excited to share this interview with you. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview with Edo van Belkom. Edo, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
It's so great to catch up with you. It seems like ages. We were hanging out at cons together and all those things.
I remember there's a photo of us at one of the stores you managed, and there was a reading there, and I looked a lot younger and more handsome. And I think you had some hair. So
yeah, hair. I did have some hair back then. That was, I think, that was Campus Chills, 2009. I think at the McMaster bookstore was that it?
No, I think it was before that. It might have been for something else. I know David Shrogryn was in the picture.
Oh, Chapters. That was Chapters.
Yeah, see how long ago that was.
1999. Maybe
it could have been. It was a long time.
90, yeah, it was a couple years ago. So and that was, I remember that was Sci-Fi Saturday. I had you and Rob Sawyer and David and Marcel Gagne and Sally, because they were editing Transversions magazine.
Andrew Weiner was there too.
Fun times early on. Yeah. So for listeners who aren't familiar, let's go back into your journey as a writer, where it all started for you way back when.
I started writing short stories, and like a guy called up to the major leagues and hits a home run in his first at bat. My first published short story was picked up by Carl Edward Wagner for Year's Best Horror Stories 20. So wow. Boom, right out of the block, I thought, I'm made for this. But, after that, it still took a lot to tell stories, and I collected rejections, and, I had a box of rejection slips. I was getting rejected like 100 times a year, wow. Maybe one or two sales each of those following years. Managed to, keep writing short stories. I wrote a bunch of novels. None of them sold. For anybody listening who is an aspiring writer, you think the first novel you write is going to sell. I wrote about 6 or 7 of them before I sold a novel, and I wrote a couple that didn't get sold till 25 years later. We can get to that in a bit, but so then my first novel was sold to Harper Prism. It was a gaming tie-in in the World of Darkness series called Wormwolf. That was the title of the book.
Right.
The gaming series was Werewolf the Apocalypse. So I did that, and that was a rush job. I did that in like 3 months because somebody dropped the ball that was in the queue. They wanted me to do it faster, so I did. Wow. Ended up on the Locust gaming bestseller list, which was, fun. And then I did a bunch of other gaming novels. Lord Soth for Wizards of the Coast, which I didn't realize at the time was a really big deal, that character. Then I also did a book called Mr. Magic for Worlds of Darkness, but that got postponed. And also I did a book called Army of the Dead for a Wizards of the Coast thing, or a TSR book called game called Dragon Dice, and that got canceled. So there was a rough patch there where I had 2 books come out, get canceled, not going to be in print. Tumultuous times. And kept writing short stories though, and I did some short stories for the Hot Blood series, and that's how I met my agent Joshua Bilmus.
Yeah,
he was representing Jeff Gelb at the time. He read my story in one of the Hot Bloods, and he said, if you're not being represented, I wouldn't mind representing you. And I had a book called Teeth that I just finished, and I said, if you want to represent that book, I will let you represent me. And he read it, and he agreed to it. So by that time, he negotiated the ends of the gaming tie-in books, but also started representing Teeth. And it took him about 5-6 years to actually sell it to Misha Merlin, which doesn't exist anymore. And we went on from there. I did a book for Design Image Group called Martyrs, and then managed to work my way up to doing mass market paperbacks for Pinnacle.
Yeah.
And, that's where it stalled because the books didn't sell and we had kind of a setback of a few years, and then the career path. And then I did young adult things and 2 anthologies for Tundra Books, Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid. I proposed a third one called Shit Your Pants, but they never went for it. So I ended up doing, at the suggestion of my wife, who was a children's librarian at the time, said, you should do some young adult novels. So I did, Wolfpack being the one. And it happened, award winner, Silver Birch Aurora, did some other books. And those books trailed off. The sales weren't there. And, so up and down, roller coaster of a writing career. I'm sure it's not unlike anyone else's. There's some success, but very hard to sustain that success right when you get to that level.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Scream Queen was one of your mass market paperbacks. And then there was another vampire novel, I remember, right?
Scream Queen and Blood Road were the
Blood
two
Road,
books.
exactly. The trucker vampire, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And both those books were optioned for film, like fantastic, 18 months options, which just lapsed.
Yeah.
And because the sales were kind of not as good as Pinnacle had hoped, they suggested I do a traditional horror novel, perhaps set in Maine with ghosts. And I'm thinking, yeah, I don't do that stuff.
Right.
I was all ready to do a sequel to Scream Queen called Screenplay, where, I don't know if anyone's read it, doesn't mean anything to you, where the producers of the series are being sued and the judge says, okay, well, let's spend a night in the house to see if it's really haunted. And it just goes from there.
Right.
But no, they wanted me to do like something like can't you do something like Stephen King? Which reminds me of, you'd be at a party and people say, oh, you're a writer. You know what you should write? You should write a bestseller. Oh, what an idea. Yeah, I never thought of that. I should write a best-selling book, a book that sells 1 million copies. Thank you.
Yeah, come on. Why haven't you done that? Come on.
So I was just like, and I did a bunch of proposals. I did about 3 or 4 proposals.
Right.
And none of them stuck. And, so it went from there.
So basically, your wife was working as a librarian and she had suggested to go into YA. And so then Wolfpack was published by a Canadian publisher. How did that
Tundra Books. Yes. Tundra Books was, I don't know if it is still in, I think it's still around. They were the young adult arm of McClellan and Stewart. So like, really a real publisher with lots of juice. And I sold the book or proposed the book over the phone just by outlining the prologue of the book, which is just the scene in the fire where the park ranger comes across the wolf cubs after the fire. And she said, yeah, write it up and present it. And we sold it as a proposal. And I'm the kind of guy pragmatic, and I'm always trying to sell more books. So I always cut $1,000 off their offer and said, how about that much for 2? And they said, yes. So, I prolonged my career by another book or so, a couple of times. And the book came out. Silver Birch did a huge favor for the book because to be on the Silver Birch ballot, first of all, you need 5,000 copies in print. But it immediately went into a second printing to reach that plateau. And what happens with Silver Birch is they pick 10 books to be on the list. And for kids to vote on their favorite book, they have to read at least 5 of them, something like that. And it was a runaway hit and a winner by a large margin that year. And that was great. Ended up selling 10,000 copies.
Which is fantastic.
But yeah, that's great. And then the second book came out, and the third and the fourth, and they all did about 1,000 copies each because they didn't have that boost.
Yeah,
and, they moved on to Silver Birch. We got new. I was hoping that the second book would become a finalist too, but and that's just up and down of the writing life. Success followed by a middling success, or even classify it as a failure, and then you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it all over again. So I'm content with the career I had and everything that I've done. So no regrets.
And interestingly enough, so for people who aren't familiar with it, the Silver Birch is it an Ontario or Canadian award for young adults, young
All
readers?
across Ontario. So
Okay,
it's part of the Forest of Reading program, which
right,
they have an award for each kind of grade.
right,
So mine, Silver Birch, was the original one,
yeah,
and that was for grades, I think, 5 and 6. And they have, different for different categories now.
yeah,
I don't know if they still do or don't, but just in Ontario, everybody in Ontario, public schools or any kind of schools, get to vote on it. And the greatest part of it was the awards presentation down by the lake at Ontario Place. They bust in school kids from all over. They had
awesome,
all the finalists on the screen, on the stage, and they announce you, and all the kids are there holding their book up, your book, screaming, and you walk out on stage, and I swear to God, it must be like what it feels like to be a rock star, because I'm like, holy, this is just the best thing ever.
wow,
And so it was the greatest moment of my writing career up until this year, which is for the past year, that's been
yeah,
filled
yeah.
with moments just to be savored.
Well, before we get there, because I'm really excited about that, because of this
Yeah, I'm
four-book
jumping
series.
ahead a little bit. Sure. Sorry about that.
No, no, it's okay, because I remember when you won the Bram Stoker Award prior to the Silver Birch Award for,
Right.
was it a short story?
Called Rat Food.
Yeah, Rat Food that you'd co-authored, and I remember you won the Stoker Award, which is a big deal.
Yeah, very big deal. We were in New York City for that. Dave Nickle, I wrote it with. And I'll just background on how that came about. He had got me to fill in for a woman on maternity leave at his newspaper, the North York Mirror.
Yeah,
So I was working there, he was working there, and we were in the same writers group, the Cecil Street Irregulars. And I was talking to him about a new story I was trying to write. So I had all this premise about this old woman who fed the rats in her house so they didn't come, you know, at the wrong times, and she could, be friendly to them. And I had an ending, and Dave said, "No, you know what should happen? It should happen like this." And
yeah,
I like, "Oh, that's brilliant!" So we started writing it, and this was before emails and all of that. Everyone on being on MS Word or conversion things or anything.
yeah,
We had a hell of a time because I was working, I think, on WordStar, thanks to Rob Sawyer. He convinced me to do that. It was a terrific program for writing books and writers in general. And Dave was on MS Word, and so we had a hard time merging the two. We had to get together physically. We had to do
right.
all kinds of stuff, and we submitted it to J.N. Williamson. Jerry Williamson did a series called Masks, and
Oh,
we
yeah,
submitted it to his anthology, and he didn't do one after that, but he provided us about 3 or 4 pages of notes on how we could make it better. And we took it all to heart, and we used just about every one of his suggestions. And then, for lack of a place to submit it to, it sounds surprising. Back in the day, there wasn't enough places or a good place. We sent it to On Spec, and they published it. And it was kind of to our advantage too, because it was in a Canadian publication, it gave us a legitimate excuse to send a copy to every member of HWA, the Horror Writers Association,
right,
so they could read it and vote on it if they felt so inclined. And that put a copy of the story in everyone's hands. So that was a bonus.
right.
And we ended up winning. So, the investment in the postage and the printing and everything was worthwhile. And that's how that came about. It was a great little statue. I don't have it within arm's reach here, but it's just over there. And terrific statuette, and a great moment too in life, sure.
Yeah, and I mean I'm gonna go back to, I remember your book launch for, because we're gonna get to an event in your hometown soon, but I went to a book launch for Death Drives a Semi, which was a collection of your previously published stories, including Rat Food.
Right.
And when I think about, the cover image of Death Drives a Semi and the title story, and I think about, there's another awesome trucker story with a trucker going over ice. over a lake.
Ice Bridge,
And
yeah.
I still remember your live readings of that story was just so dynamic. And then you had Blood Road as well, because you went on, when you ended up sort of taking a departure from speculative fiction, from horror, you continued that theme of truck driving, right?
Yeah, well, there's an interesting story. This is good that it's a podcast and you're not constrained by time, because I have an interesting story how that came about.
I'd love that. Yeah.
When Death Drives a Semi was published, I was looking for places to promote it, and I picked up this copy of Truck News, like Truck News magazine. Death Drives a Semi. There's three stories in there with truck drivers in it, and so I'm looking through the staff box, and it was edited by John G. Smith. And I went, holy cow! He was a reporter at the Brampton Times when I was a sports reporter there, and now he's editing this magazine. Like, this is amazing. So I sent him all the stuff, and I sent him a copy of the book. And he was toying with an idea of reprinting one of the truck driving stories in there, and then he was thinking just having a blurb promoting it. And then he asks me, he says, these truck driving stories, they're not trucking industry positive. Maybe you could write some stories that are trucking industry positive, and we could publish them in our Truck News. And I'm thinking, when an opportunity like that comes along, you can't do anything but accept it. So I ended up writing about Mark Dalton, owner operator. He was a former private investigator. He's on a case, and he finds out that his wife in bed with another woman, and he says, to hell with this, I'm selling everything I have, buying a truck and hitting the open road. And he can't keep his nose out of other people's business. So he lives in his truck, and every 3 or 4 chapters or 3 or 4 months, one story ends, another story begins. And it went that way for 15 years. I was continuously in the magazine for 15 years. I'm certain it was the longest ever serial story in Canadian publication history. Wow. I'm sure of that. If anyone has a better, more longer one, I'd like to know about it. And I won one of the stories, won a Tuna Award, was Truck Writers of North America Award. They gave it for a fiction story. I had a sponsor, Michelin Tires. In the end, they asked if I could do another story featuring a new to the country driver, and this one would be graphic, more pictures than copy. And I said, of course. And so I would write an outline with some paragraphs and some dialogue, and I would tell the artist, his name escapes me now, I apologize to him for it, because he did a fantastic job over the course of the time. He also did the artwork for the Dalton stories as they appeared in the magazine too. So it was a boom for him. And I would say, a picture here of this, this, and this. And he would do them all up. And for about 3 years, I was doing both the Dalton stories in print and the graphic stories with the help of the artist. And it only ended a few years ago when the magazine ceased print publication and just went online. But what a run. And from there, I'm sorry if I continue.
No, keep going.
Too long on this, because it's a fascinating story. From there, we managed to sell 2 audiobooks to Graphic Audio. They did 9 and 10 stories, I think, around the first 20 stories in 2 audiobook editions.
Right.
Mark Dalton, owner operator. And also, I was contacted by a woman from Natural Resources Canada who thought the stories were great, and it was very popular in the magazine. And she asked me if I could take a one-day workshop for truck drivers about fuel-efficient driving practices and write a novel that went from coast to coast, that incorporated all of the information from the one-day workshop, put it in a novel. And that way, drivers didn't have to take a day off the road to sit in a classroom to get all the information. Wow. They could read the book while they're on the road, with reference to at the back about the things and where to find them in the book. And so I did that, and they distributed it for free. And I went to BC and New Brunswick and Alberta and Quebec, signing free copies of the book. Like, how good is that?
That's
They did it
amazing.
in French and English and audiobooks, and they gave them away free. Truck driving schools picked up the book and put it in their curriculum to teach their new drivers driving, fuel efficient driving practices. And from there, I did two more. One to teach drivers about going in the United States, which admittedly it wasn't all that good because they didn't help me
Right.
get all the information. But the third one, they wanted to go on the ice roads in northern Canada, which was great. And they sent me to Yellowknife, and I actually went on the ice roads and talked to a bunch of people up there. And it's the funniest thing because fuel efficient driving in the ice roads is non-existent. They turn their trucks on in December, and they basically leave them running continuously until March or so. Because if you shut your truck off and it freezes, it is a long process to get it back on the road.
Wow.
But they do use auxiliary heaters and things like that,
Right.
and they plug in their trucks and things like that. But as exciting as driving on the ice roads is boring as hell. You have to stay to 30 kilometers an hour, and you have to space yourself. You can't go further than that. And the most dangerous thing about it is falling asleep behind the wheel, because drivers are up there for a short amount of time trying to get in the most runs as they can.
Yeah.
Sleep is at a premium, and sometimes they don't get enough. There's no danger of falling through the ice, which they portray on the television series. And as a matter of fact, the ice road I was on the first series of ice road truckers, and the owners of the road said, "You guys are making us look to be like mavericks and careless drivers." They said, "You can't come on our ice road anymore."
Wow.
Because the only time a vehicle ever went through the ice was at the end or the beginning of the season. There was two. Right. They were both maintenance vehicles. Yeah. Nobody was on the ice when it was sketchy and you couldn't fall through. So anyway, all of that stemming from me saying yes to Truck News Magazine. Sure, I'll write on it.
Right.
I'll write stories for it. I did 55 stories, 2 audiobooks, 3 novels published by the Canadian government. What other writer can say that? I don't think any can. No. So yeah, what a ride.
Speaking of ride, I just want to confirm for people who aren't familiar with the term ice roads. You're not talking about a road. You're not talking about a road on a regular highway that's just covered in ice. You're talking about going across
ice. Yes, frozen ice, and they drive across it in the winter, and they do that for about 6 weeks. That the ice is thick enough, and this is to act in Northwest Territories, access all the diamond mines north of Yellowknife.
So across huge bodies of water.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, wow.
There's 2 of them. One was just across the river there outside of Yellowknife. We stopped on it, looked down, and it's clear ice, black. The horror writer in me was figuring, I'm going to see somebody looking up from the below. Like, oh my God, it's that's scary. It looks terrifying. And the ice roads, they go north, driving across lakes, and, there's a couple of connecting small roads, short distances, but it is a road over frozen lakes, and it was quite the experience. And there's checkpoints and everything, and safety first before anything, and
of course
attention to the environment.
Yeah.
If you spill fuel, the company responsible has to clean it up within hours. It is like the environment is pristine, and it's kept that way, and it's very fascinating, and I wrote a novel about it. Grateful, and I never would have gone up to North Yellowknife on my own. So it was a terrific experience.
And it's kind of funny because as I look at that, you're seeing like there were some challenges with Pinnacle and all the other stuff. Is like, well, it didn't sell as many as we thought, so you moved on, and you just kept readapting. And it sounds like you follow Kevin J. Anderson has the popcorn theory of success that says, someone asked me to write a story for their magazine that they were going to pay me for. I did, okay, I'll give it a shot. Why not, right?
Well, in the writing thing, we always talk about doors opening up, right? Some close, some open up. This was a door that opened up. I went through it, and then another door opened up, and I went through that one. And then finally the one with the Canadian government opened up, and I went through that one. If I was a Hollywood actor, you would say, oh, you were able to reinvent yourself, so many times, being a horror writer, and then a mystery writer, and then a this writing about truck driving and things. Yeah, well, through the whole thing, I was a professional writer.
Yeah.
Professional can, write to specifications, deliver on time what somebody wants, and that's a talent in itself. And when you can do that, people like to work with you, right? I never missed a deadline with Truck News magazine. They always got it early, and they laid out the pages, and they never had to worry or pester me for it. And
Right.
that there's value to that. It's not just about coming up with a great idea, but delivering usable product on time every time. And I did that for 15 years. So
Wow.
something to that too.
And then while you're working away doing the stuff and also working other roles, something happened that I'm excited to talk to you about, because you just got back from LA because of this something. You talk a little bit about this Wolfpack series. What happened?
Okay.
How did this come about?
Well, I have done a whole structured talk on this, and I'll give you in the quick Cole's Notes version. And for anybody watching who's not in the United States, Cole's Notes used to be the Cliff Notes of Canada, so you can understand Cliff Notes, Cole's Notes. Wolfpack came out in 2004. There was interest at the time from somebody from the Survivor series, an associate producer. There was somebody interested who had a development deal with Paramount Pictures. Fantastic. But once those initial contacts were made, there was nothing.
Right.
Nothing whatsoever. Won the awards. We did the 3 other books. And then by 2008, the series was basically out of print. And, okay, we did our thing. It was a moderate success, and forgot all about it, got on to other things, doing the Mark Dalton series and other things. And then a year and a half ago, my agent, it was on a Friday, I remember I was sitting in the kitchen. My wife was making dinner. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, and I got an email from my agent saying, oh, someone's interested in the television film rights for Wolfpack. Okay. Do they even know that it's out of print? Like, who are these guys? Like, okay, we'll entertain this. So we got negotiating, and it wasn't a lot of negotiating, but we asked for things, and they said no. And in the end, it was funny. We almost said, well, to hell with this, forget it. But then it was like, well, okay, we'll take their money for the option, and that'll be fine. So we did, and didn't think a thing about it, because this has happened before. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, a year, 6 months later, the teaser trailer comes out, said coming into 2022 from Jeff Davis, Teen Wolf the movie. Like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then there was a pause, and then it was like, also coming in 2022, Wolfpack. And on the screen, there's my name based on the acclaimed series by Edo van Belkom. I'm like, holy shit, are you kidding me? And I was off work that day when it came out, and I watched that teaser trailer like for 3 hours, and every time I watched it, my name was still there. And like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And from there, that was in January, so it was a year since we kind of signed.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, they started filming. I'm like, are you kidding me? This never happens. And they started filming in July in Atlanta, and they filmed all the way to November. And we got invited down in October to the set. We spent 3 days on the set, so which is like another bizarre experience. You're watching this. Like, none of the scenes they were filming at the time were in my book, which is understandable. The suspension and everything, but still, to walk around and everything's branded Wolfpack, this, that, and the other thing, and like, oh my God, it's like for real. I can't believe this. And at the time, I did spend time with Jeff Davis, the showrunner and creator. And it's every time I meet him, it's like for 5 minutes, because he's always busy doing something else.
Right.
So I did ask him, I said, how did that come about? Like, I saw an interview where you said someone at Paramount gave you the book to read. And he said, yes, someone asked me if I wanted to do the Supernatural series again. He said, okay. And he said, how about this? And he'd be like, oh my God, teenage werewolves again. But he read it, and something, rang true to him or clicked with him about the series. And he said yes to it. And at the time, the person at Paramount said, "We own the rights to this." And I said to him, "No, they did not." And he laughed and said, "This is typical how Hollywood works." And, cryptically looking back at some emails from my agent, he said, "I've never had someone turn around in a one business day on something that I emailed them about on negotiating an option." He says, "There might be something up." And of course there was. We didn't know anything about it, but Paramount had already sold it to Jeff, and they had to get the rights pronto. So we had leverage, and we didn't even know it. But I'm not bitter. That's the way things work. That's the way Hollywood works. When Robert Bloch sold Psycho to a small television production company, they didn't tell him that small production company was owned by Alfred Hitchcock, and it's the same production company that did Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So, this kind of deception is, been going on in Hollywood for 60 years.
Yeah.
So I can't be too upset. But yeah, we just got back from Los Angeles last Thursday. We were there for the premiere at a theater, and thanks to Jeff Davis, we got our accommodation and flight paid for, and it was a surreal experience. I stepped out on the red carpet with my wife, and all these photographers are there. Edo, look over here. Edo, over here. Edo. I'm like, which way do I look? I don't know. And then afterwards, you're not cast member or a star. Please move along, sir. That kind of thing. So I had my moment, and we sat in the theater and saw the premiere episode. And I'm happy to say that my credit, which has to be on the screen for by itself, usually would be put at the end of the episode. It's in the opening credits. And when I said to Jeff Davis, I said, "Thank you so much for that," he said, "Nope, every episode." So I'm grateful to that. He didn't have to do that, but he did it because he felt, that it was worthy and deserving. So I'm happy for that, and it's going to be on all 8 episodes. Hopefully, it goes into season 2. He said that the people at Paramount told me to start writing, but that's not very official, right? We have to see numbers and things like that. So who knows? Season 2. Jeff says, "I think it's going to go 8 seasons." Well, that's amazing, Jeff. Thank you. I appreciate that, but we'll just see. But for now, it's like, I've said this to many people, it's like getting struck by lightning and winning the lottery all in the same day. And I'm riding this and enjoying every moment of it I can. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's still not over. We still have the premiere January 26th on Paramount Plus, and then we're doing a hometown screening February 5th here in Brampton. So there's still a little bit more to go.
Right.
And just today, there was an offer for Arabic rights to the first novel, Wolfpack. So it'll be published in Saudi Arabia. So this is the trickle-down effect, and it's still trickling along, and I'm grateful for every bit of it.
Oh, that is so exciting. I am so thrilled that I get to bring my son to the premiere in Brampton, because not the LA one that you've already been at, but the local hometown celebration of one you're doing at the theater there, right?
You mentioned before you were at the release and the theater for Death Drives a Semi. It's the very same theater.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
But that time we got it almost for nothing, and people came for free. Yeah. Now we had to rent it, and we had to pay for technicians and house managers and things, and that's why there's costs involved. But net proceeds are going to wildlife sanctuaries that we're supporting in continuation with the theme of the books. Right. But I'll just say a little bit about it. We've got Rob Sawyer is going to introduce me, my good friend, science fiction writer. We've got some clips from the wildlife sanctuaries, some behind the scenes stuff, like when people are finding their seats, there'll be a slideshow that goes from the print of the book to the premiere in Los Angeles, accompanied by werewolf and wolf themed music. And I'll be doing a reading of the first prologue that sets up the whole series,
Right.
and then a couple of surprises, and then we'll show the actual premiere episode, and then I'll come back and I'll explain how it went from print to screen, and
Awesome.
then answer any questions from the audience. And hopefully we'll have some books for sale. I don't know. That's the iffiest thing right now.
Yeah.
But we've got some posters there. There's going to be posters and all kinds of value added stuff. So not looking to make money at this, but just enjoying it and having people and
Right.
friends come in and celebrate this whole thing with me. And that's the purpose of it. So
That
I'm
is
excited.
fantastic. No, I'm so looking forward to that, and I'm so thrilled that the books are going to be available. So there's an audiobook available, ebook available, and ideally, hopefully, print soon available, right?
It's going to be close. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. It's going to be up to the day of. We'll see. Hopefully there is some.
And we didn't mention this one thing, but there's I mean, among the prestigious actors who are engaged in this process, there's probably one who's known to people who like paranormal audiences. What's I can't remember this unknown actress's name.
Her initials are SMG, and she's also goes by Mother, Buffy, like that. Yeah, Sarah Michelle Gellar, which,
Wow.
yeah, everyone involved is surprised and grateful that she signed on to it. Jeff Davis didn't think she would, and then they offered it to her, and she read the script. And this is all what I've heard.
Yeah.
So she agreed to do it because of some of the themes that they're going to be taking on, and she wants to be like a mentor to some of the younger actors on the
Awesome.
series, which is great. So she does get an executive producer credit, and I think her input on the set and with the young actors and the cachet that she brings, I didn't think it would be a real thing, but after she signed on, to see all the places where her name was mentioned and her picture was, and signed on, knew this and that, and every one of those places, my name was added on there based on the book series by Edo van Belkom. I don't think anybody who wrote any of those articles knew anything about the series, but whatever Paramount told them, it was based on the book series. It got mentioned there.
Awesome.
So I'm grateful for that. And it's all part of the ride. And she's a star, and she adds gravitas to the series, and it gets mentioned and is being looked at in ways that it wouldn't without her participation. So, I'm grateful for that, and I'm just happy that she would be involved. And if you watch the first 2 episodes, her role is slightly smaller than you would expect.
Right.
But as the series goes on, her role is going to be expanded. And if there's a series, season 2, season 3, she is going to be front and center in the entire storylines. That's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, and I think you pick up on that from the trailers that I've seen as well. So, wow, I cannot wait. I'm so looking forward to this. And I think tickets. Episode's gonna go up before your Brampton launch. So tickets are still available.
Oh yeah, tickets. If you ever want to, like, I remember Ray Bradbury saying he kept himself humble by keeping a drawer at his writing desk full of unsold tickets to one of his plays.
Yeah.
If you want to put on a performance and a show and charge people money for it, it's a humbling experience, because I signed up to get notifications every day from the box office on what's been sold, and it's like, it can be soul crushing, but we're slowly and steadily selling more tickets. The availability is good now. I don't know what it needs to get to be limited, but we're working towards that. 2 weeks to go. And it's fun to look and say, oh, this sold. And people say, I bought a ticket. And like, oh, so you're the one. Okay. I know that you're the one who bought it yesterday. Something like that. But yeah, tickets are still available. I'm sure they're going to be available right up to the day of.
Awesome.
And which is fine. I mean, right now it's a good enough crowd. It's going to look like there's people there, and there's still people coming. So I'm looking forward to that. And yes, tickets are still available.
And given your history as a writer, I'm sure you're familiar with the times where, as an author, when you're doing a book signing, it's just, apart from the people on stage, there's not as many people in the audience sometimes too, right?
I have absolutely forbidden myself to do any book signings. I will not do anymore.
Wow.
I know you manage a bookstore and you organize book signings, but when you're doing them by yourself, and they can be soul crushing.
Yeah.
You're sitting there, people don't want to look you in the eye. They'll look at you and say, "Where's the bathroom?" And you say, "Over there." Or I actually did a reading at a bookstore where I was doing my stuff, reading, and somebody complained to the bookstore manager that there was a man making a lot of noise, interrupting their experience at the bookstore. And I'm like, holy cow. And all of that is true. So bookstore signings, unless they've got 1 million copies for me to sign and they guarantee that every one of them is going to be sold, not sent back to the publisher, I'll do them. So I've had my time. I've done it. It's not like I'm averse to it, but I know what they entail.
Yeah.
And if I can help it at this point in my life to not have that grief and not have my soul crushed by someone who's looking for the bathroom, I'm going to do that. So.
Well, Edo, I am so thrilled and so happy to see this wonderful success, because you are among the best writers I have ever enjoyed in my life, and I loved your stuff. I'm so glad that stuff that you've created has been adapted into a media that so many other people can enjoy. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you very much. Jeff Davis told me, he said, "Oh, we're going to sell a lot of your books," and I'm like, the guy who's been through it all is skeptical and say, "Okay, well, let's see, we'll see." But even if we don't, this has been a great ride, and I'm having a blast. And when can you take your wife to LA and say, "Come on the red carpet with me"? So.
Yeah, no kidding. Where can my listeners find out more about you online?
Well, you can follow me on Facebook. I'm there. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm going to be more on TikTok. I'm still learning that. Like, I'm 60 years old, so I'm learning all of this stuff.
Awesome.
Half the time I'm looking at my phone, like, where did that thing go? I just saw it there. Which one was it on? On TikTok, I want to do something called Wolfpack Facts, where I do like a 30-second video comparing the book to the show, or talking about horror in general. Inspired by my good friend Robert Sawyer, who's done a bunch of TikTok videos now, and I find them very interesting, and hopefully I can replicate that with stuff in my writing career. And if you're looking for other books, you can I use my author page with Jabberwocky Literary Agency. Go to the agency there, go to the author section, click on my name. And, while you're at it, there's a bunch of other really great authors there that he represents. Brandon Sanderson and Charlene Harris, to name
Never
two.
heard of either one of them.
Tanya Huff, great writers. And, you could spend the day just looking through all that. So that's what I use for a web page these days. Social media, if you can't find me, you're not looking hard enough. And, so I'm trying to put myself out there. And I'm on podcasts like this. And I must say, this one was great. I know you're knowledgeable and you're aware of my career, so this has been a lot more fun than some. So I appreciate you having me on.
Edo, thanks again so much for just a reminder that there will be links to all those things you mentioned in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. Edo, thanks again for hanging out with me today.
Thanks, Mark. It was a great time. Thank you very much.
There's a few things I wanted to reflect on. The first one is just when you look at Edo's career as a writer, I mean, it's very exciting to see where he is now, but I know how hard he worked, taking contracts, taking jobs on spec, taking different writing tasks and duties very seriously. He was a reporter for local papers that made some connections that way. He worked on various projects for the government, for magazines, etc. As a writer, as a professional writer, he basically had a talent and a skill. We didn't even talk about his nonfiction books that he wrote for Self Counsel Press, which is a pretty significant publisher of nonfiction books and guides for people. And he's got a book on writing erotica, a book on writing horror. He basically, if it was a writing task, he took it very seriously. And as he talked about, and I used that clip for the opening of this episode, It's being a professional. And reminds me of other friends of mine like Kevin J. Anderson, Dean Wesley Smith, Christine Catherine Rush. They take these jobs to write novelizations, tie-ins to media properties because it's like, hey, it's work. I'm going to keep doing that. And Edo never stopped working hard. The second thing is that I want to reflect on is just there's a huge lesson to be learned in. We have this perception. If you wanted to make a living as a writer or you wanted to earn wages as a writer, it doesn't necessarily mean writing novels or books. Edo's last novel, I'm trying to remember how long ago it was that last novel came out. It might have been one of the ones with Pinnacle or one of the other mass market publishers. But he spent 15 years writing a series for a magazine. So he was earning money, writing regularly, very, very regularly, earning an income, not enough to live on because he was working another job, but as a writer, he was doing writing that didn't involve books. So as writers, don't close your mind to just, I have to write novels, I have to release books, I have to sign with a publisher, a big contract, or self-publish, or any of those things. There's so many other ways that we can leverage our professional writerness for work like that. And so Edo was definitely a writer who hustled, who tried different things, and for the longest time was not releasing books. And then the very, very last thing is he talked about the soul-crushing book signings, and he said, like, if I can help it, I'm not going to do that anymore. And it's because he did that a lot. I go to a book signing, and this happens to us. We sit there, and basically when I do a book signing now, the first thing I do is I find out where the washroom are. I find out where the bestsellers are. I find out the things that they're going to ask me, because they're not going to ask me anything about my books or whatever. And that can be a very humbling, soul-crushing experience because, just sitting there in a store signing books or whatever, or doing an event and then having like a reading or whatever, and not having a lot of people in the audience can be really, really soul-crushing. One of the things I would often do as a bookstore manager is I would get my staff sometimes to put on their civvies. So when I worked for a chain bookstore, we had a uniform, and I get them to put on their civilian clothes. And sometimes just to sit in the audience, because sometimes when people saw other people sitting in the chairs, they would come and sit, and so that would help bring other people to it. And a crowd attracts more people, or just for the sake of ensuring that the author didn't feel like there's only one person who showed up for their event. But the reason, so he's been doing this for a long, long time. He knows that doesn't really help sell books. So in his experience, exposing himself to the soul-crushing experience of going to a book signing and just being disappointed where everyone's disappointed, he avoids it. Just like, some of the advice for writers is don't go and read your reviews, because the reviews can be soul-crushing. Because it doesn't matter. You can get 10 5-star reviews that rave about this, the best book, and they love it, and they love this, and they love everything about it. And then one person puts a 1-star review in there and critiques one little thing. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to focus on that one little thing and not the 10 other amazing things that happen. And that's a decision Edo has made to remove himself from those soul-crushing moments, because he knows his human nature is probably going to gravitate to the negative things, so he just tries to avoid that. So think about the things that you do in your writer life. Are there things you avoid? Are there things you could avoid that can kind of make your day a little bit better? Because really just looking at that negative thing and then knowing that you're just going to focus on that negative thing can really take you down the wrong alley, the wrong path. Well, that's it for my reflections. That's it for this episode of the Stark Reflections podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any comments or you want to reflect yourself on this episode or other episodes, you can go check them out. Leave a comment over at starkreflections.ca. And so until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.